Good morning, friends. Today we will continue to read our story about the Morgans who wanted to travel from the east to the west. In mid July, the Morgans reached the Chimney Rock, is what is now called Nebraska. You can see Chimney Rock in this photograph. While admiring the sights, Mrs. Morgan and a friend almost got caught in a hailstorm. This is what Mrs. Morgan had to say about this adventure that evening in her journal. July 15th, 1846. We are making much slower progress. Yesterday, we only covered 11 miles. We were delighted to see Chimney Rock, though we had the most dreadful hailstorm. Mrs. Peterson and I were pelted by hailstones the size of small rocks. The hailstones tore some of the wagon covers off, broke some boughs, and scared several of the oxen away. A few days later, the wagon train reached Fort Laramie, another common landmark on the trip for pioneers heading west. 2 weeks later, they crossed the Rocky Mountains. Mrs. Morgan wrote, August 9th, 1846. We wound our way over the mountains along a very crooked road. Had rain and hail today, which made it a very disagreeable experience. However, Papa and I smiled so as not to discourage the children. In late August, the Morgans traveled across the dry, dusty desert. Mrs. Morgan wrote that the dustiness was like nothing her friends in the East had ever seen. She wrote this in her diary. August 30th, 1846. My friends back east know nothing about the dust. This dust makes it impossible for us to see where we are going. We cannot even see the oxen that pull our wagon. The cattle struggle to breathe, and we have the taste of the dusty air in our mouths all the time. When the children go to sleep, every one of them is covered in a layer of dust. In mid-September, the Morgans encounter some Native Americans on their journey. Mrs. Morgan wrote this. September 14th, 1846. We saw Native Americans along Snake River. They have few horses and no blankets. The immigrants are happy to trade them old clothes for fish. Toward the end of September, a young woman in the Morgans party decided that she had enough of the Oregon Trail. She sat down on the side of the trail and claimed that she could not travel any further. Then she began to sob loudly. The Morgans felt sympathy for her, but there was nothing else to do to press on. In mid-November, the Morgans reached Fort Dallas, Oregon on the banks of the Columbia River. They built a raft that would carry them and their things down the river. Unfortunately, it had been raining for several days. The river was flooded and running too fast for raft travel. The Morgans had to wait for several days by the riverside. It was cold, rainy, and windy. The family huddled around the campfire to try to stay warm. Mrs. Morgan recorded 2 entries while they waited for the weather to improve. November 14th, 1846. We are unable to move forward. We must wait for the wind to ease. We have 1 day's provisions left. The warm sunshine has abandoned us and we are chilled to the bone. November 16th, 1846. No let up in the weather. If anything, it is worse. Waves rise up over our simple raft. It is so very cold that icicles hang down from the wagon. On all sides, we see vast open fields of grass without a tree in sight. Finally, the Morgans were able to make their way down the river into the Willamette Valley of Oregon. This painting shows what an Oregon town looked like at that time. Unfortunately, toward the end of the trip, Mr. Morgan had fallen ill. Mrs. Morgan rented a tiny house in Portland, and with the help of some of the kind men, the Morgans moved into the tiny house for the winter. Mrs. Morgan sold their last possessions to buy food. Mr. Morgan was so sick that he could not get out of bed. Some of the chickens got sick as well. Mrs. Morgan was so busy caring for her family that she stopped writing in her journal for a while. In mid February, she started writing again. February 13th, 1847. It rains constantly. Our house is cold and the roof leaks badly. It is difficult to keep our spirits up. We're only able to eat one good meal a day. We still dream our new home in Oregon. I know we will get there. Fortunately, Mr. Morgan recovered, and in the spring, the Morgan family settled on a farm in Oregon. The Morgan family's journey ended well, though for many others who travel west, it did not. So the next time you're on a long trip, thinking how boring and terrible it is, think of the Morgans and their trip to Oregon, and remember, it could be worse.